Think about a time you walked into a room at work and felt completely sure of yourself. You spoke up, you led the conversation, and you trusted your own judgment. Now, think about a different room, even a different job where the exact opposite happened, where you went quiet, you second guessed everything, you held your ideas back, and you came away feeling like somehow you just lost your nerve and you couldn't be who you needed to be. It was exactly the same you, the same skills, the same brain, the same character. The only thing that had changed was the culture and the room that you'd walked into. That gap is what I want to talk about today, how we show up in different environments. And I want to dig into this because confidence isn't only our problem to fix. The environment around us does an extraordinary amount of work, and the environment isn't one thing. There are very different kinds of cultures out there, and each one makes confidence feel easy for some people and quietly impossible for others. Hello and welcome back to Decoding Confidence. My name is Advita Patel. I'm a confidence and communications consultant, and this is a podcast where I try to take the word confidence that we throw around constantly and work out what it actually means for real people at work. It sits alongside my brand new book, Decoding Confidence, the 7 Habits of Confident Leaders. So let's get into it. There's a piece of research that I keep coming back to from the Harvard Business Review, where a team led by Boris Grossberg mapped out 8 different styles of company culture. They're built around 2 fairly simple questions. The first is how an organization handles change, whether it leans towards flexibility and adapting on the fly or towards stability and keeping things steady and predictable. The second is how people relate to one another, whether the culture is more independent, where individuals largely do their own thing, or more interdependent, where it's all about the collective. When you put those 2 questions together, you end up with 8 broad flavors of culture: caring, purpose, learning, enjoyment, results, authority, safety, and order. Now, I'm not going to walk you through all 8 in great detail because that would take this podcast episode into hours. I'd rather take them in groups, because what's interesting isn't the labels, it's how differently confidence behaves once you step inside each one of those cultures. Now, before we get into the episode, you may recall an episode I did on DISC about communication preferences. I'll tag it in the show notes if you haven't heard it. But in the episode, I break down from a personal perspective on what our communication preference is. And the DISC framework talks about fast-paced and steady-paced, people and task-orientated. And when you align that with cultural intelligence and behavioral values, such as indirect and direct communication, you have a pretty powerful formula to help you identify how cultures grow and are defined. I spoke to Sarah Black about cultural intelligence in a previous episode, so I'm also going to link that in the show notes if you haven't listened to it yet. So going back to the 8 types of culture, let's kick off with the warm ones first: caring and purpose. The caring cultures are built on relationships and trust, and people genuinely looking after each other. And the purpose-driven ones are built on meaning and contribution, and the sense that work matters beyond the bottom line. These can be really lovely places to work, and confidence here tends to grow from a real sense of belonging. People feel held, they feel connected to something bigger, and that safety that they have lets a lot of them show up as their best selves. So it's great, it sounds great. But every culture has a shadow side, and the one to watch in these warm places is that harmony can quietly lead to complacency and the avoidance of challenge. When everyone is nice and they get along, the confidence that struggles in this kind of culture is the confidence to disagree and have difficult conversations, to be able to bring conflict into the room, to say that unpopular thing that needs to be said, because it can start to feel like a betrayal of the warmth that you have created and you're the one who's spoiling the mood. So you end up with people who feel deeply comfortable and yet have probably slowly learned to keep their sharper, more controversial opinions to themselves. So they look confident in many ways, they probably are, but there's a particular kind of confidence the culture has trained out of people without anyone really noticing. And that is the confidence to be able to head into conflict or difficult conversations. And then we move into the open exploratory cultures, the learning ones, which are all about curiosity and experimentation and chasing the new idea, and the enjoyment ones, which are full of energy and spontaneity and a bit of play. Confidence in these places show up as like throwing ideas out fast, trying things, being okay with being wrong in public, and then shrugging it off and moving on. If you're someone who's energized by novelty and thinks best out loud, you're going to thrive in these types of cultures and you're going to look very confident in these types of cultures. But picture the person who needs a minute to think before they speak. The one who wants to get it right rather than just get it out quickly. The more reflective, considered type. In a fast, playful idea a minute type of culture, that person can come across a bit hesitant or like they're not quite keeping up with what's going on, when really they're just wired to work in a very different type of rhythm. We watch them take their time and then we read it as a wobble, and when really it's culture simply moving at a pace that doesn't suit how they do their best thinking. That often gets mistaken for a lack of confidence in them. Then we have the driving cultures, results, and authority. Now, the driving cultures, and this is where I think confidence gets more badly misunderstood here. The results cultures focuses on achievement and winning and hitting the numbers. And the authority cultures are built on strength, decisiveness, boldness, and a clear hierarchical pecking order. In these places, confidence gets tangled up with how loud and how certain somebody is. The people who read as confident are the ones who speak first, who speak fast, who claim the win, who project absolute conviction even when they are not sure. And the quieter, more collaborative, more measured people get written off as lacking confidence when they are nothing of the sort, to be honest. They just have a very different preference. They simply aren't performing in the currency this culture just happens to reward. And we've decided that confidence sounds a certain way, and anyone who doesn't sound like that gets quietly ignored. This is also, and I find myself thinking about this a lot, this type of culture is probably one of the hardest places on earth to speak truth to power. In an authority culture, challenging the most senior person in the room can carry real risk. So the pull to not say something is really strong, which is precisely where it matters the most to lean on your expertise and be calm and clear about the consequences if the leader was about to go in a different direction. I want you to remember that you are an advisor in this organization and your job is to give them the full picture, warts and all, but they get to decide what they want to do with it because the decision is on them, not on you. Because if you let an authority culture train you out of speaking up, that's exactly where your own confidence starts to crumble and you will just start spiraling slowly. Then we have the structured cultures, which are safety and order. The structured cultures, the safety ones, are all about planning, caution, and being properly prepared. And the order ones are built on rules, process, and respect for how things are done around here. Confidence in these types of places comes from competence and preparation. If you've done your homework and you know the system inside out, and if you followed the process properly, you will feel very confident, and rightly so. But those cultures can be quietly brutal on the improviser, on the person who thinks out loud, who wants to challenge the process, who wants to try something that isn't in the guidebook or the playbook. Speaking out of turn and thinking outside of the box reads less like a contribution and more like you're a problem. So a genuinely confident problem, a capable person can find themselves shrinking in these types of environments, not because there's anything wrong with them, because every unwritten signal in that organization is telling them that this place is not the place where you can wing it. So they hold back, and then we call it a confidence issue, when really it's about mismatch between how they work and what the culture is going to tolerate from them. So one thing to remember about what I've just shared with you, not one of these cultures is right or wrong. Every single one of them is brilliant for some people and very difficult for others. That's the thing, really. And it's why I get a little bit twitchy and uncomfortable when we label someone as introvert, extrovert, or lacking confidence without ever stopping to ask what kind of culture are they in. Confidence isn't something that you're born with. It isn't a fixed setting that's inside someone's head. It's having the balance between the two, the culture they are in and the person that they are. So if you lead a team, your culture is already rewarding, I guarantee, a particular flavor of confidence, whether you ever decided that on purpose or you didn't. And it's honestly worth asking, who are you leaving out? Are you leaving out the bold, fast, certain people? Or are you leaving out the thoughtful, careful people who slowly got quiet and you have no idea why? Because on the surface, it looks like some people are just more confident than others, when in fact, it's about the culture that you have created. One of the habits I write about in my new book is empowerment. And a big part of empowerment is widening what good actually looks like so that more than one type of communication preference can show up and be seen as confident and be seen as their best selves. And if you're the one whose confidence seems to drain away the moment you walk through a door at work, then it's really worth getting to be quite honest about the culture that you're working in and whether it fits how you prefer to communicate. So sometimes the answer is to adapt and adopt a little without breaking. Sometimes it's to find the pockets of culture where you can be yourself and do your best work. But sometimes, and if I'm really honest with you, the answer is that you may be in a culture that will always make it hard for your type of preference to thrive. And that's very useful for you to know, because that means that it isn't about you necessarily lacking confidence, but it might mean that you need to build an exit plan because that culture was never built for someone like you to thrive. So the next time you catch yourself or someone near you reaching for that phrase that someone just needs a bit more confidence, have a think also about the kind of culture that they are in and if it's built for the way they do their best work and if you're doing your best to make sure they can thrive. We were never ever meant to turn everyone into the same type of personality, bold, fast-talking, endlessly certain version of confidence. The aim to build confident cultures is to make sure there's enough room that more than one person who has a different type of style of communicating can be who they need to be to do their good work. If this has got you thinking about the culture that you're in and you want to know more, then please get in touch with me at Advita at decodingconfidence.com. You can also buy my book, Decoding Confidence, 7 Habits of Confident Leaders, where I talk about this in more detail. And also my first book, which I co-authored with Priya Bates, Building a Culture of Inclusivity. We talk a little bit about cultures and what they stand for in there as well. I hope you found this episode helpful. It was really important for me to share this with you because I have spoken to many folks recently about them putting the onus on themselves to build confidence. Now, as I said throughout this episode, yes, of course, the accountability and ownership of how we feel and how we react does sit with us, but we also need to consider the type of cultures we are working in and if they are supportive of the type of person that we are in order for us to be our best self. And if you are a decision maker or a leader in a workplace that is responsible for working in teams, then you may also want to consider which type of voices show up more frequently than others. And how do you box people and label people? Because we do that, unfortunately. So have a think next time you label either yourself as introvert or extrovert or reflective or fast-paced, and have a think on how you may label others. And if you listen to this podcast episode regularly and you enjoy the stuff I talk about, then I would love you to leave me a review wherever you listen to this podcast. Take care of yourself, and I will see you next time.